Step out of the vehicle. Now, Officer Brian Collins barked, his hand resting menacingly on his service weapon. He smirked, confident this was just another easy intimidation on Interstate 75. Inside the sleek Audi, Elijah didn't panic. He just stared back, his voice eerily calm. "Officer, before you open that door, I suggest you call your watch commander. Because once I step out, your career is over." Collins laughed, yanking the door handle. He had no idea the man he just illegally detained was the director of the FBI's Anti-Corruption Task Force. The late August sun beat down relentlessly on the asphalt of Interstate 75 inches South Georgia, creating shimmering mirages that danced across the pavement. It was the kind of sweltering, oppressive heat that made the air feel thick enough to cut with a knife. Parked in the shaded median beneath the overpass of Exit 62, Officer Brian Collins sat in his idling Dodge Charger police cruiser, the air conditioning blasting against his face. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses, scanning the northbound traffic like a hawk watching for field mice. Collins was a 12-year veteran of the county sheriff's department, a man who had built his entire identity around the badge pinned to his chest. To him, the highway wasn't just a road, it was his personal kingdom, a place where he wielded absolute, unchecked authority. Over the years, Collins had developed a notorious reputation within the department. He had an uncanny knack for making high-profile drug busts, but those busts were often accompanied by a trail of civilian complaints alleging illegal searches, racial profiling, and excessive force. Time and time again, these complaints were quietly swept under the rug by a brotherhood of internal affairs officers who looked the other way. He felt invincible. He felt untouchable. Around 2:15 p.m., a sleek, midnight, black 2024 Audi RS7 glided smoothly into his line of sight. The car was immaculate, a masterpiece of German engineering that hummed with quiet, expensive power. It was traveling at exactly 70 miles per hour, the precise legal speed limit. It maintained a perfect distance from the vehicle ahead of it, and the driver used their turn signal a full 3 seconds before changing lanes. By all objective measures, there was absolutely no legal pretext to pull the vehicle over. But Collins wasn't looking for a legal pretext. He was looking at the driver. As the Audi passed his position, the tint on the windows caught the sunlight just enough to reveal the occupants. Behind the wheel sat a black man in his early 40s, dressed in a crisp, tailored charcoal suit. Next to him in the passenger's seat was a black woman, equally well-dressed, typing away on a sleek laptop. A familiar, ugly smirk curled the corner of Collins' mouth. In his warped, prejudiced worldview, a black man driving a $130,000 luxury car down his stretch of the interstate meant only one thing: illegal money. He didn't see a successful businessman, a doctor, or a lawyer. He saw a target. He saw an opportunity to flex his authority and, if he played his cards right, seize a beautiful piece of property under civil asset forfeiture laws. "Let's see what we have here," Collins muttered to himself, shifting the cruiser into drive. He punched the accelerator, the Charger's V8 engine roaring to life as he pulled out of the median and tore after the Audi. Up ahead, inside the pristine cabin of the RS7, Special Agent in Charge Elijah Bennett glanced in his rearview mirror. He saw the aggressive, high-speed approach of the Dodge Charger long before its light bar flared to life. Elijah's face remained an unreadable mask of calm. He didn't tap the brakes in a panic. He simply maintained his legal speed, keeping his hands perfectly positioned at 10 and 2. Beside him, his wife, Maya, an assistant United States attorney specializing in civil rights litigation, looked up from her laptop. She caught the reflection of the rapidly approaching police cruiser in the side mirror. A heavy, knowing silence settled between them. "Looks like we picked up a tail," Maya said quietly, her tone laced with a mixture of exhaustion and sharp, analytical focus. She reached up and tapped a small, inconspicuous button on the dashboard. A tiny green LED flickered to life, indicating that the vehicle's internal and external high-definition recording system was now actively streaming directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server at the FBI field office in Atlanta. 70 miles an hour, perfect lane discipline, Elijah replied, his voice a deep, resonant rumble of absolute control. Let's see what excuse he invents. Behind them, the cruiser's red and blue lights suddenly erupted in a blinding flash, accompanied by the short, aggressive whoop-whoop of the siren. Elijah calmly activated his right turn signal, smoothly guided the heavy Audi onto the wide shoulder of the highway, and brought the vehicle to a gentle, complete stop. He rolled down all four windows as standard safety protocol and placed both of his hands clearly on top of the steering wheel. "Showtime," Elijah whispered. Officer Collins threw his cruiser into park, angling the nose of his vehicle outward in a standard tactical position. He stepped out into the crushing Georgia heat, resting his right hand heavily on the grip of his issued Sig Sauer P320. He adjusted his duty belt, puffing out his chest to maximize his physical presence, and began the long, deliberate walk toward the Audi. He intentionally walked slightly into the traffic lane, forcing passing cars to swerve and slow down, creating an atmosphere of tension and danger. As he approached the driver's side window, Collins deliberately shone his high-powered tactical flashlight directly into Elijah's eyes, despite the fact that it was broad daylight. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to blind, disorient, and provoke a reaction. Elijah didn't blink. He squinted slightly against the glare, but kept his eyes fixed dead ahead, his hands remaining perfectly still on the steering wheel. Maya sat motionless in the passenger seat, her eyes tracking the officer's every movement, mentally cataloging his actions for future legal reference, license, and registration. "Now," Collins demanded. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state his name or his department. He didn't explain the reason for the stop. He simply barked the order with a tone dripping in condescension and hostility. "Good afternoon, officer," Elijah said, his voice even, polite, and completely devoid of the fear Collins was so accustomed to hearing. "Before I reach into my jacket pocket for my wallet, and before I reach into the glove compartment for the registration, I would like you to inform me of the reason for this traffic stop." Collins leaned down, resting his forearms on the windowsill of the Audi, invading Elijah's personal space. The smell of stale coffee and chewing tobacco wafted from his uniform. "I don't need to explain myself to you, boy," Collins sneered, leaning heavily into the derogatory term. "You were swerving. Failure to maintain a lane. Now hand over the documents before I pull you out through this window." "Failure to maintain a lane," Elijah repeated calmly, committing the lie to the audio recording. "Officer, I have lane assist technology in this vehicle, and my dashcam has been recording my driving for the last 300 miles. I have not deviated from the center of my lane once. Furthermore, the Supreme Court ruled in Rodriguez v. United States that a police stop exceeding the time needed to handle the matter for which the stop was made violates the Constitution's shield against unreasonable seizures. So, I will ask you again, what is your articulable, reasonable suspicion for detaining me?" Collins' face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He wasn't used to citizens, especially black citizens, quoting case law at him on the side of the highway. His authority was being challenged, and in his mind, that was an unforgivable offense. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here," Collins mocked, taking a step back and unlatching the safety hood on his holster. "You think you're smart, huh? You think that fancy suit and this expensive car make you untouchable?" Collins leaned his head closer to the cabin, taking a deep, exaggerated sniff of the air. It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the corrupt cop playbook. "You know what?" Collins lied smoothly, his eyes narrowing into predatory slits. "I smell the distinct odor of raw marijuana emanating from this vehicle. That gives me probable cause to search this entire car. So, here's how this is going to go. You are going to step out of the vehicle. Now." Maya finally spoke up, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Officer, neither of us smokes. There is absolutely no odor of marijuana in this vehicle. You are fabricating probable cause, which is a direct violation of our Fourth Amendment rights and a federal offense under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Collins snapped his head toward her, pointing a thick finger in her direction. "You shut your mouth, lady. Speak when spoken to." He turned his furious gaze back to Elijah. "Step out of the vehicle. Now," he barked, his hand resting menacingly on his service weapon. He smirked, confident this was just another easy intimidation on Interstate 75. Inside the sleek Audi, Elijah didn't panic. He just stared back, his voice eerily calm. "Officer, before you open that door, I suggest you call your watch commander. Because once I step out, your career is over." Collins laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Are you threatening a sworn officer of the law? You just made the biggest mistake of your life." He violently yanked the door handle, pulling the heavy door open. "Get out! Get your hands where I can see them!" Collins screamed, his voice reaching a hysterical, commanding pitch meant to project dominance to any passing motorists. Elijah moved slowly, deliberately, giving the officer absolutely zero excuse to claim he felt threatened. He unbuckled his seatbelt with his left hand, keeping his right hand visible, and slowly stepped out into the blistering heat. Despite Collins screaming, Elijah stood tall, smoothing the front of his suit jacket. At 6'2", Elijah was a physically imposing man, radiating an aura of disciplined, lethal capability that momentarily gave Collins pause. But the officer's arrogance quickly overrode his instincts. Before Elijah could even fully turn around, Collins grabbed him roughly by the shoulder, spinning him violently and slamming his chest against the side of the Audi. The hot metal of the car burned through the thin fabric of Elijah's shirt, but he didn't make a sound. "Spread your legs. Wider," Collins ordered, aggressively kicking Elijah's feet apart. He began a heavy-handed, invasive pat-down, his hands roughly patting down Elijah's torso, waistline, and legs. "Where are the drugs? Where's the weapon? You got needles on you?" "I am unarmed, officer. I am not carrying any contraband," Elijah stated clearly, his face pressed near the roof of his car. Collins finished the pat-down, finding nothing but a high-end leather wallet in Elijah's back pocket. He snatched it, tossing it carelessly onto the trunk of the Audi. "Don't move a muscle," Collins warned, pointing a finger in Elijah's face. He then turned his attention to Maya. "You, out of the car. Go stand behind the cruiser." Maya calmly closed her laptop, stepped out of the vehicle, and walked precisely where she was told, keeping her posture perfect and her expression neutral. She stood safely behind the cruiser, observing everything. With both occupants removed, Collins felt a surge of triumph. The car was his. He leaned into the driver's side, his eyes scanning the luxurious, immaculate leather interior. He began tearing through the cabin with reckless abandon. He ripped open the center console, tossing pristine charging cables, a pair of expensive sunglasses, and mints onto the passenger seat. He jammed his hands under the driver's seat, feeling for hidden compartments. He moved to the back seat, violently pulling down the leather armrest and checking the seat pockets. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing. No drugs, no paraphernalia, no weapons, no large stacks of shrink-wrapped cash. The car was cleaner than a surgical theater. Frustration began to gnaw at the edges of Collins' confidence. He had committed to the narrative of the marijuana smell, and now he needed anything to justify his actions. If he couldn't find a legitimate crime, he was prepared to manufacture one. He patted his own uniform pocket, where he kept a small, clear plastic baggie containing a tiny amount of crystal meth, a drop piece he had acquired months ago for precisely this kind of emergency. He hadn't used it in years, but today felt like the day. But first, the trunk. The trunk was where the real secrets were always kept. Collins stomped to the rear of the Audi. "Pop the trunk," he ordered Elijah. Elijah turned his head slightly. "I do not consent to any searches of my vehicle, officer. I want that on the record. I told you, I have probable cause." "Your consent means nothing to me," Collins sneered. He found the electronic release button under the lip of the trunk and pressed it. The heavy lid hummed and smoothly rose on hydraulic struts, revealing the spacious cargo area. Inside the trunk, there were no duffel bags of illicit goods. There was only a set of custom-fit golf clubs, a dry-clean suit in a protective bag, and a large, heavy-duty, reinforced Pelican case secured with two heavy steel padlocks. Collins' eyes lit up. A locked, heavy-duty case in the trunk of a luxury car driven by a black man? In his mind, he had just struck gold. This was the prize. This was the cartel money, the bulk narcotics, the illegal firearms. "What's in the box?" Collins demanded, a predatory grin spreading across his sweating face. That box contains highly sensitive, confidential materials, Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a warning that should have chilled Collins to the bone. I am telling you right now, Officer Collins, do not open that case. Collins froze for a fraction of a second. How did he know my name? He hadn't given it, and his name tag was partially obscured by his body camera. But the momentary hesitation was swallowed by greed and ego. You don't tell me what to do, Collins snapped. He reached down to his tool belt, pulled out a heavy steel tactical pry bar he kept for breaking windows, and jammed it under the latch of the left padlock. The sound of grinding metal echoed over the hum of the highway traffic as Collins violently wrenched the pry bar. With a sharp crack, the first lock gave way. He moved to the second, his breath coming in heavy, excited pants. Crack. The second lock shattered, falling to the carpeted floor of the trunk. Let's see what you're hiding, criminal, Collins muttered, flipping up the heavy latches of the Pelican case and throwing the lid open. He expected to see bricks of cocaine wrapped in duct tape. He expected to see stacks of bundled $100 bills. Instead, he saw a pristine, custom-cut foam interior. And resting in the center of the foam were three items that made Brian Collins' heart stop dead in his chest. The first item was a thick, meticulously organized dossier binder, stamped with a large, terrifyingly recognizable seal. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, top secret, no foreign. The second item was a leather credential wallet, flipped open to display a crisp, laminated photo ID. The photo was of the man standing perfectly still next to the car. The text next to the photo read, Elijah Bennett, Special Agent in Charge, Anti-Corruption Division. And the third item, gleaming in the harsh afternoon sun, was a heavy, solid gold shield, an FBI director's badge. The blood drained entirely from Collins' face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His stomach plummeted into an abyss. The oppressive Georgia heat suddenly felt like a freezing blizzard. His hands began to tremble so violently that the pry bar slipped from his grip, clattering loudly against the bumper of the Audi. What? What is this? Collins stammered, his voice barely a squeak. His eyes darted frantically between the gold badge and the man he had just physically assaulted. Elijah finally turned around, completely ignoring Collins' earlier orders to stay still. He stepped away from the car, smoothing his tie, his posture transforming from that of a compliant civilian to the apex predator of federal law enforcement. What you are looking at, Brian, Elijah said, using the officer's first name like a weapon, is your worst nightmare. But since you took the liberty of opening a federally secured case without a warrant, why don't you read the title of the dossier? Collins' eyes moved to the thick binder. His vision blurred, but the large, bold letters printed on the front cover slowly came into horrifying focus. Subject target, Cobb County Sheriff's Department. Sub-target profile, Officer Brian Collins, badge hash, 4 tone. Operation, Broken Shield. Collins stumbled backward, bumping hard into the rear of his own cruiser. He couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked out of his lungs. The man he had just racially profiled, illegally detained, physically assaulted, and intended to frame was not just an FBI agent. He was the special agent in charge of the exact task force sent to investigate him. You, Collins gasped, looking at the dossier, then at Elijah. You set me up. This is entrapment. Entrapment requires me to coerce you into committing a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit, Elijah explained calmly, walking slowly toward the terrified officer. I didn't make you pull me over. I didn't make you lie about my driving. I didn't make you fabricate the smell of marijuana. I didn't make you physically assault me. I simply drove 70 miles an hour down a public highway and let you do exactly what you do to dozens of innocent citizens every single month. Collins frantically reached for his chest, his trembling fingers fumble at woman to hit the power button on his body camera. If he could turn it off, if he could delete the footage. Don't bother, Elijah said, stopping 3 feet away from the trembling officer. My vehicle is equipped with a level 4 covert surveillance suite. Everything you have said, every lie you have told, every illegal action you have taken has been recorded in 4K resolution and broadcast live to a secure server at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. Elijah pointed a finger directly at Collins' chest. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. It is a federal felony. And you, Brian, just committed it in front of the FBI, an assistant U.S. attorney, and God. The absolute silence of the highway shoulder was broken only by the sound of passing 18-wheelers. The power dynamic had completely inverted in a matter of seconds. Collins, who moments ago was a roaring tyrant, now looked like a frightened, cornered animal. "Sir, Agent Bennett, please," Collins begged, his voice cracking, tears welling up in his eyes. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Listen, I made a mistake. I was stressed. We've been having a lot of drug trafficking on this corridor. I misjudged the situation. We can just pack this up. You can get back on your way. No harm, no foul, right? Professional courtesy?" Elijah let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Professional courtesy? You strip innocent people of their constitutional rights, steal their property, and ruin their lives to feed your own ego, and you ask for professional courtesy?" Elijah reached into his jacket pocket. Collins flinched, instinctively reaching for his gun, but froze halfway, realizing that drawing a weapon on a federal agent would guarantee he left this highway in a body bag. Elijah pulled out a sleek, encrypted satellite phone. He dialed a single number. The call connected instantly. "This is Sack Bennett," Elijah said into the phone, never taking his eyes off Collins. "Operation Broken Shield is a go. Suspect is Officer Brian Collins. We are currently at mile marker 62 on Interstate 75 northbound. Bring the hammer down." Elijah hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He looked at Maya, who had walked over from behind the cruiser, her arms crossed, a look of absolute disgust on her face as she glared at the disgraced officer. What did you just do?" Collins asked, a cold sweat pouring down his face. "I just ended your career," Elijah said coldly. "For the last 18 months, my office has been building a racketeering and civil rights case against your department. We have informants, we have financial records, and we have the complaints of over 40 civilians you've terrorized. The only thing we needed was to catch you in the act on federal tape. I volunteered to be the bait." Collins looked around wildly, his mind racing for an escape. He thought about running for his cruiser, hitting the gas, and fleeing to Mexico. He thought about drawing his weapon, but he was paralyzed by the sheer, crushing weight of federal authority bearing down on him. Less than 3 minutes later, the horizon filled with flashing lights. But these weren't the blue and red lights of local county sheriffs. These were the alternating red and white strobes of federal law enforcement. 3 massive, armored black Chevrolet Suburbans tore down the highway, surrounded by 4 unmarked Georgia State Patrol pursuit vehicles. They slammed on their brakes, swarming the shoulder and completely boxing in Collins' Dodge Charger. The doors flew open, and a dozen heavily armed FBI agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI Civil Rights Division poured out, M4 carbines held in high-ready positions. "Hands in the air. Do it now," the lead agent roared. Brian Collins collapsed to his knees on the hot asphalt. He didn't even try to fight. He raised his trembling hands high into the air, tears streaming down his face, sobbing uncontrollably. 2 agents rushed forward, grabbing his arms and violently slamming him face-first onto the hood of his own cruiser. "Brian Collins, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18, U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, official oppression, and attempted fabrication of evidence." The lead agent read the charges as the cold steel of federal handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Collins' wrists. As they patted him down, one of the agents reached into Collins' uniform pocket and pulled out the small, clear baggie of crystal meth. The agent held it up, looking at Elijah. "Found a drop piece on him, Director," the agent called out. Elijah walked over, looking down at the pathetic, sobbing man pressed against the police car. "Add possession of a Schedule II narcotic with intent to distribute to the list of charges. Let's see how he likes federal minimum sentencing guidelines." Just then, a silver unmarked sedan pulled up behind the federal convoy. A heavy-set man in a high-ranking sheriff's uniform stepped out, looking absolutely horrified. It was Collins' boss, the chief of the department. He had been called by the FBI field office the moment Elijah initiated the takedown. The chief practically sprinted over to Elijah, his face pale. "Director Bennett, I had no idea. We had no idea he was operating like this. The department fully cooperates with the FBI." Elijah turned his piercing gaze to the chief. "Save it, chief. We have the emails between you and Internal Affairs burying his complaints. Your office is currently being raided by my teams as we speak. You're going to be sharing a cell block with him." The chief's jaw dropped, all color draining from his face, as two state patrol officers approached him to place him under arrest as well. Collins was yanked to his feet by the federal agents. He was stripped of his duty belt, his radio, his badge, and his weapon right there on the side of the highway. He was reduced from a terrorizing king of the interstate to a disgraced, weeping criminal in front of passing traffic. As they dragged him toward the back of the armored SUV, Collins looked back at Elijah one last time. "You ruined my life," Collins screamed, spit flying from his lips. Elijah simply adjusted his suit jacket, looking at the man with cold, unwavering justice. "No, Brian, you ruined your own life. I just provided the mirror." The trial of Officer Brian Collins was swift, highly publicized, and absolutely devastating. The federal prosecutors, led in part by evidence compiled by Maya Bennett, dismantled every defense his lawyers attempted to mount. The courtroom was shown the high-definition video from the Audi's dashcam, capturing every racist sneer, every illegal command, and the exact moment Collins broke open the FBI Pelican case. The revelation of the dropped piece of meth in his pocket shattered any remaining credibility. Dozens of previous victims, black and brown drivers, whose lives had been upended, who had lost jobs and served jail time because of Collins' lies, were brought to the stand to testify. For the first time in his life, Collins was forced to sit in silence and listen to the people he had destroyed. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict: guilty on all federal charges. Because he had carried a firearm while depriving citizens of their civil rights, the sentencing enhancements were severe. The federal judge, looking down at Collins with absolute contempt, sentenced him to 22 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. 3 years later, Brian Collins sat alone in his tiny, concrete cell at USP Atlanta. His hair had thinned, his arrogance completely beaten out of him by the harsh reality of federal prison. He spent his days scrubbing floors for 20 cents an hour, constantly looking over his shoulder, a disgraced cop living among the very people he used to illegally arrest. Meanwhile, Special Agent in charge Elijah Bennett sat in his spacious corner office at the FBI headquarters in Atlanta, reviewing the latest success metrics of Operation Broken Shield. The operation had resulted in the arrest and conviction of over 30 corrupt officers across 3 counties. The systemic rot had been cut out. Elijah looked at a framed photo on his desk of him and Maya, smiling brightly. He took a sip of his coffee, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. The highway was a little bit safer today. The badge meant a little bit more. And the predators who hid behind the law now knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that there was always someone higher up the food chain watching. Justice wasn't always swift, but when it finally arrived, it hit with the force of a freight train.